Good morning, afternoon, evening, and welcome to our webinar, Ethical AI: Navigating the Moral Compass of Technology. Today, we will delve into the complex interplay between artificial intelligence and ethical standards. The steam engine, the internet, combustion engine, the telegraph, the telephone, all of these inventions are general purpose technologies. General purpose technologies are technologies that vastly impact life whenever they are introduced. They touch all levels of society, all industries, and create new industries. Artificial intelligence is one of these type of technologies. So, as we push the boundaries of what technology can achieve, it's imperative that we also consider the societal implications and ensure that AI development aligns with human values. Therefore, today we explore a range of topics from biases and privacy to regulation and future challenges. So without further ado, let's start with introduction. My name is Michael Thiessmeier. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. National AI and Cybersecurity Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. It's a task force or program under the Tora Breda Institute for AI and Cybersecurity. Today, I will be joined by Jason Keller. Jason, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Greetings, everyone. My name is Jason Keller. I'm a former intelligence analyst in the United States Army, where I worked with the special operations community. Following that, I spent about 10 years working in the federal government in roles in the intelligence community, emergency management, and homeland security, and even worked on helping veterans transition from military service to the workforce. Afterwards, I finished up my master's at Syracuse University's Maxwell School, the Executive Master's in International Relations program. Also a trained ethical hacker, and I've done a significant amount of studies on AI. I currently work as a consultant, assisting partner nations and beneficiaries of international development organizations with cybersecurity and adoption of emerging technology. And then, I've kind of started piling all that experience together to start working on the issues of helping governments adopt emerging technology and making sure that it's benefiting humanity versus just benefiting profits.
Absolutely. And I feel that very much myself, right? When we're talking about AI and the ethical challenge, I think we are fairly good with like talking about the technical challenges all the time. And if I even like look at the event that I recently spoke at, all of the sessions were basically focused on the technical challenges, on the latest cyber threats and developments from an innovation perspective, from a technology perspective. But you rarely ever really hear significant time being talked about ethics. And I think that is a challenge. And the one thing that really piqued me about your background was that you have spent significant time in cyber capacity building, which is basically, right? How would you define that even, by the way? Just real quick for the audience that has no idea what that means.
That's working with nations to implement their national cybersecurity plans and their national digital strategies, for instance, making sure that we address cyber risk across the board, making sure that governments are doing, again, their ethical and moral obligations to help their citizens. For instance, if you bring 5 million people online tomorrow, including a lot of businesses, have you prepared those individuals to be resilient and to prevent crimes from happening, prevent people from being trafficked online, etc.? Are they aware of the new world that they're stepping into when we take those steps as countries?
And I think that is the point. Are people aware of the new world we're stepping into? I think cyber capacity building often focuses on those nations that are not as fortunate as maybe the nations where we both grew up in. And with that, you're basically, I think, espousing some of the things we're talking about when we're discussing ethics around AI, which is how do we ensure that AI does not only benefit the richest of society, but instead is equitable in its use and provides essentially benefit to all of us. So then this brings us to a very foundational question, but that is really, really big. Like all questions that sound simple are incredibly difficult. And this is basically, what are the primary challenges from an ethical perspective that we currently are being faced with when we talk about the development of AI? And then how do these challenges kind of shape public trust of the landscape of innovation on top of this?
Yeah. So, I mean, the most basic element, I think, ethically is asking ourselves first, should we be doing this? Second, are we ensuring that everyone has representation in the conversation and that we're truly working for the entire population? Give you an example. The nation of Colombia, specifically their Office of Director of National Intelligence Equivalent and Universidad de los Andes hosted an event late last year, and it was focused on national intelligence in the cross section of human security. For instance, do we spend $1 billion only going after the bad guys that we were trying to arrest because they're a bad person? Or, for instance, take space sector investment. Should we spend half of our imagery collection on developing systems that empower our citizens and allow them to make better life's decisions? Again, going back to the human security element, is intelligence only meant to serve the national security apparatus, or should it be meant to serve the entire population in different levels and in different ways? And it was truly an interesting discussion because I had not engaged with anyone previously as an intelligence professional in my entire career that has really brought up those kinds of issues. And I consider that an ethical issue because the money, the tax revenues, all of it is the totality of our society. So should that investment only go to serve certain missions, or should it go to serve the broader community?
Different type of example, but I also kind of had this epiphany recently. As you are aware, we are hosting the UN AI Innovation Factory in North America. This one just finished. We are setting one up right now in the Baltic states, which is supposed to be hosted December 6th. And then we are in conversations about hosting one in Colombia for Latin America as well. And one of the things that I realized when I looked at what startups are winning and how judges choose was initially alien to me, because I spent like more than a decade in Silicon Valley, and I was looking at startups through the lens initially, like if you see what's going to be the most profitable in the long run, what's going to do this, what's going to achieve like a rocket stick growth and all this kind of stuff. And then I realized that when you're talking about it from a UN perspective, from a sustainability perspective, when you're looking at other things than profit, these are not necessarily the things that get a startup selected. And this is exactly what happened in this case, because it's not about profits necessarily. It's not, is this going to be the most profitable business for the stakeholders and for the investors? It's, is this going to have a impact, which then changes the conversation dramatically. You might have a high-tech solution that is absolutely amazing, but maybe that high-tech solution cannot have a massive global impact yet because only, I don't know, the upper 20% of countries in the world can even afford implementing this in their healthcare system, and the rest cannot. So then for us, if we are selecting winners, if we are dispersing funds, should they be going to the solution that the classical VC would pick, or should they be going to the solution that has the greatest impact? And we chose the latter one as well, which was literally a 180-degree flip from how things are usually done. Yeah. Now, all right, we understand that we cannot be guided by profits. We need to have inclusivity in the dialogue, and I think that is really, really important because it's if certain voices in society aren't heard, not only does that have an impact on how solutions are designed, but on top of that, then later on, once solutions are designed, of course, we're dealing with the topic of bias. Because if I am a designer, an architect, and I am living in my bubble, I will build a system that suits my needs, unless I've been trained not to. And then I will potentially start data collection and start trying to receive results that are particularly useful for me, but potentially not for others. So dialogue is the most important thing. So who should own this dialogue? Like, what are the parties that should be involved? What are some of the formats that you've seen that work out well?
So I don't want to skip over this because this is a critical question. I was in a couple of events this last week in Washington at the African Union Embassy, and then two others at George Washington University. And this topic of inclusion, especially in the global environment, was very well covered in some of these discussions. For instance, how do we interact with people and individuals based on language? Most of the large language models, sorry, I started to say large LLMs, that have been a little duplicative. Most of them are largely trained on the English language for a host of reasons, but some of it is simply that societies have not digitized significantly over the past 20 years. So their baseline data that they're starting with as we enter the, this new era of AI, if you will, this next stage and all these advancements, there's nothing to start with. There are languages around the world that are not represented in online databases, let alone do they have the sheer amount that would be necessary to train those LLMs, or at least based on the current state of the art for most things. But I'm hopeful. Second to that, let's go to a domestic aspect, or any nation in the world, right? Law enforcement use of AI. Do we put cameras and make investments for, identifying if someone has a warrant via CCTV in the public space? But all of those things are located in neighborhoods that are largely minority communities, right? Whatever nation you're in, that is a problem. And that is truly an unethical, in my opinion, use of those technologies. So what can we do about it? In the law enforcement environment, I 100% believe that we can institute public sector programs, oversight, committees that have to check and review use of AI by all entities across the government, hold them to minimum standards, etc. The private sector question, I think, comes back to, and something I wanted to insert in your previous discussion, is public-private partnerships, bringing the academic institutions, the public sector institutions, and the private sector together to do these things together that can have shared local data lakes and things of that nature. But they're working off of a shared investment, so that just the private sector solution, the private sector needs, are not the only ones weighted in those local investments. Lastly, the global discussion around this, and I think we're going to touch on this later. There is someone who's been in 15, 16 countries in the last 2 years talking about these issues. There is no, individual concept of what regulations should look like, how to convey and make sure one culture is represented versus another. And in the United States, in a melting pot culture, it becomes that much more difficult. So yeah, I'll pause there and see what you've got to respond to that.
Well, the first thing I will say, I will go back to the surveillance issue, right? Because that's I think that's the most classical scenario for bias in data sets. Because even the worst thing here is the following, right? Let's assume my original data set, I really worked hard to not have it biased. But now I'm going in and I'm deploying the camera solutions or the surveillance solutions exactly the way you described it. Keep in mind, we are continuing to gather new data, harvest new data, and with that refining our data set, with that changing our model going forward. So if I deploy then these solutions that might have been actually relatively bias free in the beginning into primarily minority data, minority towns, minorities areas, yeah, then the consequence of that is that my solution will not only disproportionately, of course, affect the minorities, but also will get way, 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 way better or worse at detecting people that belong to minorities and will prefer the identification thereof. So that,
Yes.
I think, is a massive, massive issue as well. And again, like you said, I think there's oversight needed, but there's also training on behalf of the original engineers that build and supervise the deployment and maintenance of further development of these systems. And I think there's like certain ways of defining kind of these benchmarks and KPIs for that. Of course, there's mathematical solutions for measuring bias, but it's a chicken and the egg problem, because if we don't have the right conversations from the beginning, we don't include the right people, then the outcome will be suboptimal no matter what. And I see this in private sector. Again, going back to the fact that if I look at how many conferences have dedicated tracks to ethics, it's not that there is never an ethics person speaking, but it is rare. And that's scary when you're talking about a technology that touches everything, right? And this is why, for example, and I don't want to self-advertise the ISAO here, but why we build ourselves as this like public-private partnership that combines government, academia, and industry. And whenever we do these RFI, when we answer RFIs or whatever, we're making sure that we do have somebody with a specialization in ethics on those programs or task forces, right? Like, and this goes down to, if you want to have dialogue, you have to reach out to people, because for us, that primary contact point was the Human Rights Center at Berkeley, which we met the contact. Do you remember where? SciCon and Tallinn.
Ah, yes.
In Tallinn, yes. So I talked to this lady and made sure I took her contact, because I knew, oh my God, here's an ethicist, like an actual, like highly trained academic with doctorate degree and everything, that also understands cyber and that is reaching out to us as cyber professionals. So I'm going to make sure I'm immediately tying her in so that she can work as a resource for us. But
absolutely. So, Michael, I would say on that, bringing up the university-based partnership is absolutely vital, because you and I both know every 6 months that we are making leaps in the development of this technology, but in no way, shape, or form has the investment caught up. And then also that private sector, kind of concept, everything is driven towards where the money is being created. And let's be honest, there's very little market push to get this equivalent resources into the research on ethics. So if a startup or whomever wants to introduce a new product today, they cannot just be reliant on what they are doing and the things that they are taking in. They have got to reach out, establish these partnerships, and actively track where we are finding gaps, whether it's being able to hack the outputs of the Chat GPT and make it, say things that are blatantly racist and affecting the customer, to identifying, some of the hacks that are going on in facial recognition, or my automotive or my self-driving car that I'm going to deploy on the street, but I'm not aware that I am putting many people's lives in danger because an 8-year-old with a sticker in the wrong location can destroy my car's ability to brake. These are all realities, and no one has the resources to stay on top of them. So if you're not working with somebody else, you're already behind.
100%, right? And that's I think one of the important lessons here. It's not enough to just say, hey, we're not trying to do any harm. You have to be proactive, because the entire situation, the entire ecosystem involved in deploying AI solutions, from how you gather data, get your data sets, how you actually like the supporting technology, everything that's involved in there. And then the users that interact with it. Even like in an IoT scenario, it's even worse, right? Because it's like everywhere at the same time, essentially out there in society at that point. But all of this is so incredibly complicated, and these adverse effects often come without intent either. I remember like one of the first cases It was a discrimination suit for they call it artificial intelligence. I'm going to call it ML, machine learning assisted recruitment tool that a company in Cary, North Carolina built. It was SAS. It's a data analytics, they have a giant like statistics package company. It was highly respected. They were kind of like the Google before Google. And they created a solution that was supposed to help them pick the candidate with the best cultural fit. And when you hear the word best cultural fit, you should immediately, I think, like there should be like red lights going off, like a siren should sound up, because while this is a great idea, you are touching culture. And if you touch culture and look at what flows into culture, it means you're essentially dealing also immediately with stereotypes and with other aspects that might actually be a protected category on top of that. In this case, SAS had a strong veteran culture, and it was picking up on that. And then as a result of that, candidates that were perfect in every other way essentially got discriminated against and found themselves rejected, despite receiving all of this positive feedback from the from HR and whatnot. So these things need to be proactively managed, and again, they require, I think, more sets of eyes on them than just the engineering department or just the data science department, even though I think your data science team is probably the best trained to deal with bias from a mathematical perspective, from a statistical perspective. But this goes beyond just pure math at that point. Like, you have to think ahead of that, specifically if you're deploying something that has a vast impact on people.
Yeah. I mean, just the data science team itself, what makes up the data science team? Are there people of color on the team? Are there women represented on the team? Are there different age groups and, potential life experiences, and bringing those things in is absolutely vital. And if you don't have it, especially for some of the smaller organizations, look outside of those things, create unique systems to say, hey, we're going to find some other way to make sure that voices other than my own are going to be involved in this conversation. And it has to be, again, that has to be a cultural thing, bringing others in. And if it is not any organization that is starting one of these projects, I'm scared of the outcomes, especially if they, have broader societal impact. For instance, the banking sector, and whether or not someone gets a home loan, that scares me. And I've actually been a quote unquote victim, if you will, of an algorithm that was sitting out somewhere that got inaccurate data pumped into it by an administrative error in an insurance claim. And somehow it translated to the banking system and was rejecting a loan application, I believe it was. It's been a minute, but no one was empowered that I could call to override that decision. This is USAA. Not a small banking institution. But no one could tell me. They're like, oh, well, this other organization actually maintains it or something. It was absolutely insane. And to me, that a financial institution could just farm out a yes or no answer on their product to an outside vendor and had no internal mechanism to review and say, something's not right here.
Now that you mentioned that, I think actually the situation with SAS was exactly the same. Like, every human in the loop was like, I don't understand why this candidate got rejected. Like, why? Well, it got rejected because the system says the candidate is rejected. And the organization would have never, let me see what it says. Okay, that's a good question. We'll get to that in a second. Nobody in the entire decision chain was empowered really to take action and reverse that. So it had to be basically lifted up to a high enough level. And then the company started doing all sorts of soul searching about this tool that they had deployed. But by that point, it was too late because the damage had been done, right? So this brings up a super interesting part, actually, that originally when we're talking about like AI ethics, we talk biases and all this kind of stuff, but there's the aspect of privacy. And ownership of your own data, and what you just talked about, I think is a perfect example for how you did not have ownership over information that was out there about you, and you had no recourse mechanism at all to address this. And I think this brings a huge education challenge as well. If you go and you're growing up today, there's so much data gathered about you, right? And if you do not take ownership yourself over this data, you will never, it's almost like a fool's errand to begin with, but you will have no idea where this information will end up with one day, who is owning it, and you have no recourse. So the question is, what can people do, ordinary people, to protect themselves and to get ownership over their data? Is there actually a good solution for that nowadays?
Some areas are taking steps in that direction. I would say nobody's really met that mark. There was actually someone who just dropped a note regarding how do we get engineers to consider ethics, right? And I think you need to go all the way back to the schoolhouse. The problem is the schoolhouse doesn't have anyone to teach those classes. So we're kind of stuck in a doom loop right now in some ways. I mean, we really are. We have to get these basic concepts to be, a basic level of awareness for people. As I was talking a little bit about the cybersecurity side of the house, policymakers, legislators, city managers, others in position of power have to know where these things are, professors, but also the engineers. Everyone has to first be aware. So that way, when I, as the engineer, or I, as the lawyer of, Syracuse, New York, when I'm sitting around talking about how our city is going to adopt AI, that if no one else around the table is aware of that when we start the conversation, again, we are already so far behind in meetings today, in just the way our work culture is, especially in the public sector, just boom, 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 meeting to meeting. Nobody has time to learn anything, listen to anybody else. So somebody brings up these issues, and I have more than once seen them, we'll get to that later, and later never comes. So what does the individual do? First, you got to get involved politically. This has to okay. One, we have to get engaged. Again, we have to get past the tipping point, if you will, that people care about this, period. If the average citizen does not care, politicians don't care. So again, we are keep moving down the road without any meaningful U.S. legislation in this space, period.
Well, this basic awareness, though, right? It's a chicken and the egg problem now, because, and this is one thing that I started noticing in cyber capacity building, we're starting to tie like all of these themes really early into the education system. But it seems that we're not doing that at home. I just finished another computer science degree, and the ethics course was, I think it was like an elective. I could have, with everything else, I could have completely gone through this without ever taking a class on ethics or philosophy, just by choosing my elective course correctly. And that's a huge problem, because I realized at the end of the day, we can say computer science, STEM, right? This is what it's supposed to be. This is what I'm primarily there to learn. But the fact is, if all I'm being taught by are only engineers or only computer scientists, how will I ever get as a professional that will turn into the person building those solutions, that will be sitting in front of Congress or wherever else in industry associations and inform the minds of others? I mean, that's the end goal, right? Like, you're supposed to turn into a wizard of your domain. Well, if never at any point in step I had exposure to this really in a concerted way, then we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely, Michael. I mean, it's not just on the ethics of this side too, but I mean, how many people are talking about the cyber threat to AI systems as well? Again, that being an ethical issue, you have customers pumping information and their data into this system. They're placing their trust in you. but I would say the vast majority of AI active, on cloud-based systems today is probably intermediate level security at best. So, industry has to take action, but there are others in the space. The think tank side of the house can get engaged, insurance, regulators, other stakeholders. Everyone has to really raise this to the level of a priority discussion, because it should have been a couple of years ago, and we are well past that now. We have genocide that has occurred in this world today that is attributed to the failures of Silicon Valley, namely a particular company who has gone through a rebranding and may be called Meta now, that is responsible for, in many ways, the deaths of thousands of people because it programmed people to hate others or expanded upon that hate to the level of societal breakdown, if you will. And that's the discussion we're getting into now. What is the effect of AI-driven IO with a largely unregulated internet going to mean? How much longer are individual citizens going to have anything resembling a shared semblance of what is their nation, what are their national values, what are their cultural values, even down to the community level? Like, we're having these breakdowns where you see people that used to be neighbors, happy, could interact, and they're breaking down because I truly believe that AI is entering completely different concepts and pain points in discussions that just never existed because people are taking in the data and it's being force fed by an AI that is sole purpose is largely to make you addicted to the platform you're using.
I think what you're bringing up here is actually like a very sad story, and it is one that I feel and I'm using the word I feel here on purpose when I'm thinking about it. It just seems that this was such a massive failure on our end, both the professionals as well as the regulators as well. And I'm trying to, this is why we're going to NATO's conference on cyber conflict. This is why we're at Riga Stratcom Dialogue. The reason we're going there is because we're trying to work on the norms for the deployment and use of certain tools in conflict, in information-based conflict, right? Because when you're talking about social media and how AI or how machine learning drives and shapes narratives and can be used to manipulate, of course, information warfare immediately has to come up, disinformation, misinformation. And I feel at times we're working so hard to kind of create this standard, this codex. I'm not going to call it Geneva Conventions, but like this like ethical standard for conduct in information warfare or cyber conflict. But only a handful of countries sign it. Then what's the purpose of that? So then that goes down to A, are we creating a document that there's no enforcement for? And B, if you don't get everybody to agree on it, what's even the purpose of the document then in the first place?
Yeah.
But it's not reason not to do it.
So I will pause on that. As somebody that works on the international stage, leadership matters. Whether it's 5 countries or 15 countries, it is absolutely vital that nations stand up and say where they stand. I do agree on that. However, we haven't got there yet. The similar problems with the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, for instance. Not every nation has signed up for that. Not every nation sees the value in that. And then there may be political and local forces at work that, you couldn't even imagine because of the local context of why one nation or another is joining in these things. But at the end of the day, the professionals, I think, a lot of the public sector leaders, the policymakers are still looking at those documents, are still looking at those concepts and going, the Americans, the Europeans, etc., whoever have said, this matters. And you know what? I think I agree. Yeah, my government isn't signed up on this, but I can take those values and I can do my best to translate them down to the local policy that I'm developing for my Ministry of Telecommunications or whatever, and move forward those things. Another example is the United Nations. Oh goodness, the reasonable activities in cyberspace. I can't think of the cyberspace norms or whatever it's called. Again, that is a fantastic document just to say what matters, because everyone out there, all of the different political folks, the different decision makers still have something to hold on to go, we want to be like this. We want to be a democratic government. We want to preserve these things for the long haul in our country. We haven't got there yet with our legal framework, but we at least still know like this is the right direction. And so, yes, we should absolutely continue to stand up, sign those documents, even if only our 5 friends are with us, and say, yes, these are our values and this is what matters.
I asked you actually this question on purpose because one of the questions that we were handed beforehand was, can AI ethics, or can ethics basically with that, be standardized globally? And well, can it be standardized globally? The answer is probably no. But just because you can't do that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do it, because sometimes just an activity, just communicating is worthwhile by itself. Like you said, just creating a position, announcing intent, announcing your standards that you're trying to uphold is by itself valuable. And sometimes the absence thereof, even if the document isn't worth what the paper it's written of when it comes down to court, the absence of a document like that can have horrendous consequences. We've had this in the past when it came to war crimes, when everybody was very clear XYZ was a horrendous thing that had happened, but on the books, that crime hadn't been defined. There was nothing to hold people to these standards. I think actually a bunch of people in the Nuremberg trials got off because of those small technicalities, because certain acts had not been defined as war crimes, and hence they couldn't be held accountable for them. I don't think we ever want to be in this type of situation again, which I think is why having these type of conversations around ethics, whether it is for cyber, whether it is for AI, are incredibly valuable to be had.
Absolutely.
So actually, ethics is a foundation in all cultures. I agree with that. I think the question is based on the foundational values. What one culture might see as ethical behavior, another culture might not see as ethical behavior. I think that is, of course, ethics has a foundation definitely everywhere.
Yeah. And trying to train the AI what that is, and again, a multicultural environment, that's why I think it goes back to, and the most important thing that matters in the AI conversation is the first time that somebody goes, what do we want to do? What do we want to accomplish? And what are we going to allow to happen? And defining that moment is the most important conversation, because to go back to a quote from Jim Carrey, all things our decisions are either based out of love or fear. I think the same thing can translate to the AI. If you tell the AI that the most important thing for me is making the money, that my users are on my platform as much as possible, it will make those things happen, and it will not conform to most people's concepts of ethics. People try to tell me that, all the time that it can be done, and I have not seen a solid example thus far on a global scale. So if it's there, awesome, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't.
I love that Lou just actually mentioned like Asimov's robotic laws, a total classic when it comes to AI conversations surrounding ethics. And I agree, right? Like it comes down to then at the point when you're trying to standardize, like the substance becomes less and less and less, and you're just like ending up then with like a limited set of what is in the end being agreed upon. Now, the criticism that people bring forth, and I've seen that because I've served at the Interstandards Organization, and usually it's like, well, the standards aren't detailed enough, or the standards don't include enough guidance, enough this, enough that. Well, yeah, that's what happens when you have all of these different countries and stakeholders come together, and you're trying to find out the least common denominator between them, right? That's just naturally the principle. But I would fully agree. You have to start somewhere, and something very basic and foundational can be the foundation for that, like Asimov's laws of robotics, or any other like set of very basic rules of engagements or conduct we can agree upon. This brings me, though, like another thing that I just read in the chat, to an interesting thought that I've always had, which I'm kind of getting concerned about, which is it seems we are fragmenting the conversation as well. So think about it this way. In the past, we had certain organizations that were involved in these dialogues. The IEEE is one of them. I would consider the IEEE as absolutely, like, a word to describe them, as venerable. I would, the International Standards Organization for sure. And they are very apolitical. It's very important to point out. And then you could say, okay, let's go a little bit more towards, then we have the UN. Some people might say the UN is more political, but even that is still, it's like a massive organization that includes like a vast majority of the stakeholders that exist in the world. You have the United Nations, you have the OECD, which some people might say is right now in an identity crisis, yes or no. But they have been around for a long while. And there's a reason they have been around for that, because they are well established. They already include a good amount of industry stakeholders, academic stakeholders, and government stakeholders. And I sometimes worry when all of these new bodies are being founded, are we taking away from those existing structures? Which specifically worries me, because industry itself is vastly built around those structures. Like, think about auditors, for example, right? Auditors are based on auditing ISO standards to a large degree. So like, there's already all of this existing ecosystem, and I'm not sure whether we're not doing harm here by completely always trying to reinvent the wheel, or whether the existing bodies just need to be more inclusive and proactively reach out to more diverse stakeholders. What is your thought on this?
So, yeah, I am one of those people that walks back from creating too many more organizations. That's from, the discussion around the creation of national cyber agencies in many countries, especially some of the smaller nations that simply, don't have that large of a public sector apparatus. But yes, I think that the United Nations and other organizations, while they may not move as fast as we would like them to, they're vital to the international discussion. I think that we should more pursue innovation and change and continued development in those organizations to adapt to a new world. Now, the product of the United Nations is around 80 years old right now, developed on a concept of a world where globalization was almost non-existent. We are in a very different world today. So yes, could those things move faster? Could we find ways to collaborate and come to answers faster? Quite possibly, but there's two massive problems. One of them is called the People's Republic of China. The other one is called the Russian Federation. And they are absolutely working at an international level to disrupt these conversations, to encourage the breakdown of the international order, to reframe it, etc. So the problem we have now is we have two states that are blatantly going a different direction in these. They want to use AI to control the population. They believe that these things are better for the long-term outcomes of their nation. And they don't want to see success in the international and regional bodies unless it benefits the direction that they are trying to take the global internet. And that is not one that is based on the values of, the folks that set it up 20, 30 years ago, or Shoot, now we're getting close to 30, 40 years ago. Pardon me, math is hard.
I fully agree with you. I shared the same experience. I was serving on the SC27 subcommittee 27 of the International Standards Organization since 2013, I think, if I correctly remember. Which is, for those that don't know what that committee is, it's information security, different topic than AI, cybersecurity, but nonetheless, we all see where the overlap is, right? And one thing that we absolutely saw there during that time was the rise of China, and the emphasis they took and the resources they devoted to, I would say, dominate the conversations, to be honest, frame them and dominate it, and how deliberate the process was, where they would show up in at the summits with 100 plus people, while the UK would have like four, and I don't know, like Canada had two delegates, and they would show up with 100 plus people, and for the first 2 years, they basically just took pictures and observed, and didn't talk to anyone. And then suddenly, the entire machine, like a well-oiled machine, sprung into motion, and across every single project started heavily influencing, and they basically played the card, right? And I'm sure in AI we are seeing exactly the same thing at this point, and people aren't aware of these things, because a lot of time people like me, we don't talk about this, not because we've been forbidden to talk about it, but simply because we don't have the opportunity to chat about it, and most people aren't involved in these type of things. But I think you're 100% right. There's a clash of cultures, or a great power competition that is currently happening, which does not only deal with power competition, but is directly a clash of values. And that is directly affecting our ability to standardize, to regulate, or whatever else you want to call it, AI, and come to a consensus on AI ethics. I'm 100% sure about this.
Indeed, sir. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Shoot, I believe it's called Everything Under the Sun. I read this book back during my master's degree, and I think it's well, now it's not. Everything Under the Heavens: How the Past Helps Shape China's View for Global Power. Excellent book. Highly recommend anybody that's watching this pick it up, pull it out, because that's the direction that's like helped show the guidebook. It's about 1,000 years of history and where China believes that they should sit within the structure of the global order. They are now obviously a major economic power, very rapidly becoming a major military power, and have been for quite some time, along with the Russian Federation, the top five in the cyber threat landscape internationally. So how are those things being used? What is the intent behind it? These things matter, and we've got to start being honest about these discussions. If we're going to say, oh, okay, well, we're going to have the technology policy discussion, you cannot have that without accepting the fact that those individuals on the other side of the table have a completely different concept of where humanity should take these things.
100%. And this kind of, then we look towards the future, right? I don't want everybody to leave from here completely demoralized and afraid and everything. But the fact is, I think we are at a pivotal moment, and we have a massive challenge ahead of us, specifically because we are facing both a world that is in turmoil, to be honest, right? This like age of great power competition is happening at the same time as the introduction of a general purpose technology, in this case AI. I can maybe expand on this a little bit as well, which is, we're talking here about having dialogue, right? Dialogue among as many stakeholders as possible inside of society. Get academia involved, get the government involved, and come towards sensible solutions. But again, the problem is, if I look at some of our adversaries, or let's call them not adversaries, but like some of the non-aligned states and what they're doing, I can't name them, but I once had a reach out that a state wanted to build um, it was a national cybersecurity leadership training program, which was incredibly elaborate, right? Like they basically went in and were asking me to build this program, which would have been, I think it was a 4 to 6 weeks program for every agency executive, followed by mandatory 3 months of close supervision, and then almost the entire year of mentoring available to them. A tabletop exercise integrated as well. Now, for those people that are asking, why are these people talking cyber right now and not AI? Well, the reason is because if they're setting up something like this for cybersecurity, if they're smart enough to realize how important cybersecurity to their society is and to setting themselves up correctly, you can bet they are also talking to people to set the same programs up for AI and data literacy among their agency executives. And I have not seen any of this to that degree being done at any, like, let's call them aligned nation. Maybe I'm missing some of the efforts there. It's of course also a different size, a different challenge in terms of size, but definitely not like that. And that's concerning when it comes to how successful we will be when we're
Mhm.
talking to people, because they have to be empowered to have the dialogue in certain ways.
Yes, sir. I mean, and we're doing our best to introduce those things. The U.S. government has issued the National Cyber Strategy, the National Cybersecurity Implementation Plan. Section 5 of the National Cyber Implementation Plan is focused on international engagement. A big piece of that is the U.S. government is going to be backing and already is varying training and professional development for partner nations in this space. And I truly believe it's some of the best investment that the U.S. government could be doing right now in the international arena. Because, hey, I live in Bogota. You live in Europe. We have American citizens, green card holders, U.S. persons all around the world, and we want to be able to travel freely. And if we do not stay engaged, the world's going to be a very different place in the next 10 years. And what it means just for the average person walking around the world and what they sacrifice or not, depending on where they go, is all going to be decided by these conversations we're having today, tomorrow, and moving forward.
Thank you. So maybe this is actually a good transition point for us towards the end of this event, because what I want to really drive home to those people that have listened to us is the following. I think obviously there are things that as democracies we cannot do to put forth a direction and align all the resources of the country or of nations behind one common goal. But what we're good at is hopefully what we will be good at is driving those dialogues. And these dialogues become more successful. We will have a better outcome and a better chance if people get involved. So I think my ask for everybody here would be that they are encouraged to seek dialogue outside of their own comfort zone. So if you are an engineer, please go and reach out to people that work on ethics. Go and take a course on philosophy. Go and cognizantly seek out this type of knowledge. Join an industry association to be part of the dialogue. Like, make yourself heard as a professional in the field, no matter what your background is. Don't disqualify yourself. That's the most important thing as well. People will say, like, oh, well, I work for a small company that only has 30 people. What am I supposed to do in a forum, like, let's say, like TBI? I say, oh, but it doesn't matter what it is that hosts UN events and all this kind of stuff. Well, actually, we specifically want you, because usually people like that do not have access because they're not represented by companies that have multi-billion-dollar budgets and the standing and the persona, the power, the influence to be part of those gremiums. So go become involved, seek out dialogue, and talk to your legislators as well. I think this has to be a number one priority going forward. We already laid out, of my perspective, like I'm maybe this is my German pessimism coming in. For me, I'm looking at this and I'm already saying, like, wow, yeah, we should have probably had these conversations 5 years ago, 7 years ago. But uh, let's not be a pessimist, and let's look at the future and say, let's do the best we can do now. Jason, any closing words?
Uh, Thank you for being a friend.
Absolutely, buddy. Jason and I, we go back quite a bit. This was actually supposed to be a panel with more participants. Instead, you've gotten Michael and Jason that have been friends, I don't know, for 10 years plus or something like that, having a little fireside chat on AI ethics. And yeah, thank you so much for giving us your time. And give us a consideration. And if you don't get involved with us, get involved with a different organization. Make yourself heard.
Be a leader.
Have a good day.